Pivot tables let you summarize and analyze large data collections. And in this movie, I will show you how to supplement that analysis by adding conditional formats that show the relative magnitude of different values within your pivot table. The conditional formats I'll cover are called databars. As my sample file, I will use the databars workbook, which you can find in the Chapter 5 folder of your exercise files archive. This pivot table contains monthly sales data for 5 different departments and 3 months, January, February, and March. And what I'd like to do is add data bars to these cells here, B5 through D9, so that I can tell the relative magnitude of the values without focusing on the individual numbers. To do that, I select the cells, and then on the Home tab of the ribbon, click the Conditional Formatting button, and then point to data bars. When you point to data bars, you see 2 different categories of data bars that you can create. The first one is called gradient fill, and the second is called solid fill. I'll show you what a gradient fill data bar looks like. I'll click the red data bar here on the side. As you can see, gradient fill data bars start with a solid color to the left side of the cell and continue on fading to the right as they move through the cell, with a border around the bar to indicate where it begins and ends. Data bars were first introduced in Excel 2007, and at that time the only type available to you were gradient data bars, so they're included here for backward compatibility. In most cases, however, what you'll want to do is use solid fill data bars. You want to do that because there's no fall off in the color, so the length of the data bar is easier to discern. So I'll click undo to undo the data bars there, and then with the cells still selected, the conditional formatting, data bars, and this time in the solid fill group, I'll click blue. Doing so applies the data bar conditional formatting, and as you can see, there is no gradient, so no drop-off. The length of the lines is much easier to tell in relation to other lines or other data bars within the pivot table. Now, one element that you probably noticed is that the January column is much wider than the other 2 columns, February and March. And the reason for that is the pivot table's layout. I can change the layout so my 3 January, February, and March columns are all the same by clicking any cell in the pivot table, then clicking the Design Contextual tab, and then clicking Report Layout. That button is over here in the Layout group. At present, the pivot table is shown in compact form. What I want to do is display it in outline form. So I will click the Show in Outline Form item, and when I do, Excel rearranges the pivot table. It takes away the row labels and column labels markers, and instead, I now have 3 columns, January, February, and March, that are all the same width. When you add a data bar conditional format to the body of a pivot table, make sure you only select cells that contain individual data units. In other words, you want to avoid grand totals and subtotals because those values will generally be much larger than what is in the body of the pivot table, and it could skew the lengths of the data bars by comparing them to much larger values. Those are the basics of using data bars in Excel 2013 pivot tables. They help you see the relative magnitude of data without getting in the way of the numbers in the pivot table.